Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name is Ellie and I'm the founder of Code of the Future, and today we're going to be continuing with the Rust course where I'm teaching you all about Rust for beginners. Before we dive into the tutorial, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you are new to the channel. But with that said, I'll put my glasses on and I'll move you onto the screen. Okay, so in the previous video we looked at pointers and references, and in today's video, tutorial 14, we will be looking at what are known as structs. Now we are approaching some of the last videos on Rust, so stick with me, we've almost finished this course. So we are going to look at structs, and we're just going to say structs in Rust are similar to classes in other programming languages, and essentially they are quite similar to tuples in that you can hold multiple values and they can be different types. So remember when we did tuples, you can have tuples with different types in, unlike arrays and vectors where they have to be the same type. Now what's different about them, so unlike tuples, in a struct you name each piece of data so you know what the values mean. So structs are more flexible than tuples. Okay, so that's a bit of an overview of what structs are. Don't worry if that made no sense. I'm gonna show you an example of what structs are now. So we're just gonna get rid of the hello world and add a few more spaces down here. So the first thing we're going to look at are traditional structs. So the convention for defining a struct is you will write struct and then uppercase, so I believe it's camel case for structs. So let's say colour, we want a colour, and that's how you do it. It's very similar to classes. In other programming languages you just say struct and then the definition, you know, what you want your struct to be called. So here we have colour. I apologise for those of you that don't spell colour like this and spell it like that. I am British, so I spell it with a U. Don't hate me. So we're going to do colour. Now what I'm going to do is quite a simple example here, and we're just going to say, okay, well, we're going to have our data for red is going to be a U8. Now I'm going to have some green. That could be a U8 as well, and we're going to have some blue, and that could be a U8 as well. This is how you define a struct. You write struct, what your struct name wants to be. Inside, you then write curly brackets, and inside that, that's where your data will go. So here we're going to have red, the type is going to be a U8, and then each data type here, or each I suppose thing that you want to hold in your struct is separated by commas, not semicolons. Okay, so that's how we do structs. Now something that I've just realised, this should not be inside the main function. This is outside the main function. So apologies for that. We're just going to indent that back and have the main function as it was. So there we go. Structs have to be outside of the main function, and this is how we've defined a traditional struct. Now where the main function will come in handy is when we want to call this struct. So let's just say to use a struct after we've defined it, we create an instance of that struct by specifying concrete values for each of the fields. And what I mean by fields, these here that we specify inside our struct. So inside here we're going to say let a mutable, I guess, colour option 1. We're going to let that equal to our struct, so our colour, and notice how it comes up, it recognises that is a struct here. If we click on that, it'll come up and say, oh, colour is a struct, we've defined that. And then we're just going to copy essentially what our struct, the structure of our struct, in the sense that we'll do this, and then just pass values for our red, green and blue. So let's say we want red, there's no red at all. Let's say we want it to be 255 of green. Remember that's the highest value of a U8, so if I just put here U8 has range 0 to 225, and then let's pass blue and say we don't want any blue, so this is just going to be completely green. Okay, cool, so there we have created an instance of our struct by doing this here. Now something that I quite like about structs is you don't actually have to define the fields in the order that they are given here, so I could put blue at the top, and that's fine. It doesn't follow any particular order, just to be consistent, I suppose, with what we've written. I'm going to do it in order, but it doesn't actually have to be in order. And I guess I'll just make a little comment of that there and just say you don't need to specify the fields in the same order in which we declared them in the struct. The struct definition is a general template for the type, and instances fill in that template with particular data. So this is almost seen as a template, and then when you make an instance, you're giving a specific value to that. And just because I've realised that it's kind of on its own there, I'm just going to pop it there. But how do you change these values? You notice I let colour option 1 be a mutable instance of this struct, and that's because we're going to do some changes. So I'm just going to say changing these values / properties, and all I'm going to say is colour option 1, which is right there. I'm going to then do a dot, and let's say I want to change the colour blue, and notice it comes up straight away. So I want to change our field blue, and I'm just going to set that equal to 200, and that will change this colour option here. So let's say we want to access each of these values in our colour option. So access values in colour option 1 instance. All you're going to say is print ln, and then I guess we'll just say the colour is going to be these 3 values. So we're going to have colour option 1 dot red, colour option 1 dot, did we have green? It was green next, and colour option 1 dot blue, and a semicolon on the end. So if I run this, hopefully we will get no errors. Do cargo run. Of course we need a, where's the semicolon gone? There. Wouldn't be a tutorial with me without missing my semicolons. Okay, cool, there we go. Colour 0255 and 200, and that's because here we changed it. You know, similarly we could say, well, let's change red, and I also want that to be, well, let's say 20. Save that, cargo run, there we go, it amends it. So that's giving you an idea of what a traditional struct looks like, basically giving you an overview of how you define structs and then how you create an instance of that struct. So we looked at traditional structs, now we can look at what is known as a tuple struct. So a tuple struct, I'm going to add an extra space, and we're going to start by defining a new struct, and I've just realised this has to be outside of the main function again. So we'll just bring it up here, so that's traditional struct. Here we'll have a tuple struct, and the struct is going to be called colour 2, so I guess colour option 2, and it's going to follow a tuple format. So it's going to have brackets like this, and we're just going to pass 3 different U8 values into here. Okay, so that's our tuple struct. Now we're going to pass in some values for this struct, and I'll just put here, I guess the tuple struct one, so here, and I'm going to say let mutable colour option 2. That's going to equal colour 2, and in here we're going to input some random values within the range, so 0, 13, 2, 3, 1. Okay, and all we're going to do is just print the colour again. In fact, I'm just going to copy this entire thing here, but instead I'm going to change these to colour option 2, and instead of red, green and blue, because notice that we haven't given names to these numbers that we input here, whereas in our traditional struct we did do. So how we recall these is just by simple indexing again. So instead of red, green, blue, we're just going to do 0, 1, 2. And I'm going to run this, but before I do that, I'm just going to check my semicolons. Yeah, need one there. Okay, right, cargo run. Awesome, there we go, colour 13, 20, sorry, 0, 13, 2, 3, 1. Awesome, there we have it, so that's our tuple struct. Now these are quite simple structs. You know, we haven't included any function or anything involved, and what I want to do now is exactly that, get some functions involved. Now this it's quite hard to keep track of coding when there's so many different things going on, so I'm just going to copy this entire struct file, and I'm just going to create a brand new rs file. I'm going to copy it into here, and I'm just going to save it as structs.rs. I'm going to save it. So that's now in there. It'll be on my GitHub, don't worry. It's saved as structs.rs, but if you then want to copy it, please copy it into a main file, because we are using fn main here. I will be showing you later how you can actually import, separate files, but for now, yeah, make sure you copy it into the main file. So that's just saved there. So I'm going to, don't need tutorial 3 anymore, 13, sorry. So I'm going to delete this entire thing, and all we're going to have is just our main function. So I'm going to start again. So structs number 2. And we're just going to have our fn main function. Okay, so what I'm going to start by doing is, I guess, creating a struct with functions. Yeah, and I'm going to create a struct, and I'm going to call it education. Now, you'll see at the end of this video that you can make structs out of anything. I've used education just so hopefully it's a bit easier to follow, but there are some tutorials out there that do a whole range of different things, so yeah, you can be very what's the word, creative with structs, I would say. So I'm creating a struct called education, again capital letter for education, and I'm just going to pass some fields. Now I am from the UK, so for me I would use a university. I have a lot of followers from the US and other countries that use the college system, so I'm just going to say college name, but it's the equivalent of a university, and I'm going to make that a string. And then following on from the whole US system, I'm going to do a major title, so that's going to be what you major in, and then you're going to have a minor title, which will be what you minor in. Okay, pretty straightforward. We're just assigning 3 different fields, and they're all going to be strings. Now, what I want to show you is something known as impl. Now, before I do that, I'm going to explain what it is. So the impl keyword is primarily used to define implementations on types. So implementation blocks will house the functions and methods associated with our structs. So that is exactly what the impl does. It's known as an implementation of our struct, and this will be where functions and methods associated with our education struct will go. So the way we do that is impl for implementation. We're going to write education, so this is going to be the implementation on the education struct, which we have here. Just going to add some spaces down here. And I'm just going to construct the education. So what I'm going to do is create a new function, and I'm just going to call it, I'm going to put constructing education, just so we can follow this, because I understand structs can be quite difficult to understand. So yeah, I guess making things a bit easier, that's what I'm doing. Yeah, so in our function, our constructing education function, we're going to pass our college. Now that's going to be a reference to a string, and that's because this string may change, and that's why we're taking a reference. And we're going to do the same thing for each, in fact I'm going to just do this down here. I'm going to do the same thing for each of, so the major, that's going to be a reference to a string, and minor is also going to be a reference to a string. Now this is a function, it has 3 different entries. Notice that I didn't put college name or major title or minor title, because they're the fields that are passed in the struct of the education, so we have to define a new variable here. So these are the parameters that are passed in this constructing education function. Now if you remember from our functions video, we use this command, which shows you what output you're expected to get, kind of what data type, I guess, and for us that's going to be our education struct. So we're just going to write here // to our education. Now this is quite confusing. We have to write education again, and that's just because what we're doing here is, if you remember, this forward arrow is saying that this function is going to return the data type of education, and in order to get education we then have to, to get the data type education we have to recall education again. So that's what we're going to do. So don't worry, I'm just going to go through all of this like we are now, and we'll just explain. So in education, what do we have? We have college name. So I'm going to make that equal to college, which is our parameter here, and we're just going to put to string, and that's just going to enable this here, whatever we put in here is definitely a string. And we're just going to do the same for major title and minor, and just making sure we have commas. Minor title, that's going to go to minor to string. So what we've done here is we've constructed a function called constructing education, and that just constructs our education. We input certain parameters, so our college, the college we're at, our major and our minor. That's going to then return an education type. In order to get the education type, we obviously need to recall our education struct, which is exactly what we've done here. Now this isn't essentially an instance of our struct like we did previously. Okay, so how do we recall this specific function that we have, constructing education? And the way that we do that is in the main function, we're going to let so let's say let education1, I'm going to make it mutable because may change it. That's going to be equal to our education struct, and inside our education struct we want to access our constructing education function. Remember, that's how we recall a function from a specific struct, or library, we do 2 colons. So here we have constructing education. Now if you see from our function, we have 3 parameters in it, so we need to input 3 parameters. So I'm going to say, okay, I went to Cambridge, that was my college. I studied maths, and then as kind of like my, I suppose, background, like what I did alongside it, I also studied astrophysics. And hopefully now if I print ln, and we get education 1. Now what I just realised was I was getting ahead of myself. I don't actually want to print this variable. What I want to do is call certain elements from this variable. So what I want to do is I want to say my education, and we're going to have 3 different curly brackets, and we're going to recall our, let's say, college name, and I'm just going to put this down here. We're going to do the same again, recall education 1, and we want our major title, and then education 1, we want our minor title. And hopefully all being well, if I cargo run now, there we go. We have education, Cambridge, maths, astrophysics. Awesome. So what we could do here is instead say education, and we could say college is that, major is that, and minor is that. Okay, and again, cargo run. There we go. Education. Or I guess we could, I don't even need to put education, I could just simply get rid of education and say college, and it'll do college is Cambridge, major is maths, and minor is astrophysics. Again, could put some full stops in here to make it a bit clearer. But essentially what we've done here is we don't need the mut for now because we're not actually changing education 1. So what we've said is we've created a variable education 1, and that essentially takes the education struct or implementation, and inside that it finds this constructing education function that we have up here. We input our specific parameters, and then when we want to print it, we just recall the specific, I suppose, factors from that education. So you'll notice here we are recalling college name, major title, and minor title. Okay, cool. So what this is what is known as an associative function. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce methods. So we're going to do the exact same thing but using a method. So we're going to create a function known as, well, we'll just call it full education. These 2 things are exactly the same, but in methods you have to take a reference to self, and that's just something. So methods, the first argument is always self, which is the instance the method is being called on. Associative functions don't need this. You don't need and self in your associative function, which is what this is here. So it's going to take a reference to self. We're going to let this return a string. Inside here we're going to say format, exclamation mark, and you may recall this from one of my previous videos. It's essentially just formatting some nice things, and inside here we're going to say self.college name. Just put it down here so it's a bit easy to see. Self.major title and self.minor title. Okay, so all this is doing is it's essentially just taking a method, function, full education, it's taking a reference to self, it's going to return a string, and inside that string we're just going to format the 3 values that we need. So down here in function main, we don't need to do this entire print line. We've taken a variable that's mutable, and all we'll do down here is say print line. We're going to say education 1 curly brackets, and you're just going to put education 1 dot full education open brackets. So now if I was to print this, cargo run, there we go. We have Cambridge Maths Astrophysics. So this here is a very simplified version of this. Essentially what we've done is this full education method that we have inside our implementation does this here. It does exactly this. It just says, okay, we'll format self.college name and self.major title and self.minor title, which is exactly what we have here, except self is replaced by education 1. So that's how structs can be really handy in Rust, is you can take something as complicated as this and simplify it down to this. Now what I'm going to show you is how you can change things in structs. So we're going to just put here change major. So let's create a new function. I'm going to call it change major. So let's say you are 10 days into your start of your degree and you're thinking, I hate this, you might want to change major. So we're going to take a mutable reference to self. Again, self is what we did here, and we're just taking a mutable reference because we will eventually want to change it. Our major is going to be a reference to a string, and that's all we need. We don't need the others because we're not amending the others. Open brackets, and all I'm going to say is self.major title. It's going to just be major to string. So all that's doing is it's changing the original major title that we had previously, and it's going to change it to whatever we pass into this function. So if I go down here and let's say we want to change the major, all I'm going to say is education 1, change major. Let's say I don't want to do maths anymore. Let's say I want to do chemistry. Or do you know what, I'm going to do computer science to stick with the theme of the channel. And then again we can print our education, and hopefully when it prints it'll have changed to computer science instead of maths. There we go, computer science. Awesome, so that's how we change the education, so our major in this section. Okay, awesome, that's how you change your major using structs. So what we've touched upon here is, in the previous, in the start of the video, we looked at what structs were here. Very simple example of a struct, and how you create them, and then how you make an instance of that struct, how you change values, how you recall specific values in a struct. We then moved on to something a little bit more complex. Don't worry too much if you don't understand. Structs take a while to get your head around, but we looked at how you can incorporate functions and methods using impl, so implementation in structs. We started with a very basic struct with college, major and minor. We then said, okay, well, let's do some things to this struct that we have. So let's first construct the education. The way that we did that was inputted specific parameters for this function, so college, major and minor. We changed it to, we wanted this function to return the type of education, which is what we have up here, so our implementation. Indeed, we did that, and we just inputted our education in here and said, well, let's change college, major and minor to whatever we input into this function. We then looked at methods and how you can simplify a few things using methods, and also how you change things in your struct as well. Now, I could go on forever talking about structs. They're quite they can be quite complicated. I'm planning on releasing the video later on about structs and following exactly what happens in the Rust tutorial book. But I thought I would bring my own touch and show you how you can create an education as well using structs. So that has been structs in Rust. So that was the video today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then please give this video a big thumbs up. Subscribe down below if you aren't already subscribed to the channel. Comment if you fancy commenting. I also have a donation page and a Patreon set up for exclusive behind the scenes footage, if you fancy checking that out. But yeah, as I said, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.